Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Barclays, Deloitte, and Auberson Abels, I'm delighted to welcome you to this discussion on fiduciary duty. In investment decisions, can an asset owner or an asset manager consider non-financial elements such as environmental or social factors? Do they have the right to exclude certain companies from the investment universe, even if those companies engage in legal activities like oil or shale gas extraction? Are they obligated to exclude them if they perceive a financial risk or a negative impact on the environment? These questions will be at the heart of our discussion this afternoon. Hello, I'm Antoine Amiguet, an attorney at law and partner with Auberson Abels in Geneva. I am a member of the Committee of Sustainable Finance Geneva and have been involved in sustainable finance for about 15 years. I will moderate this session. Allow me to introduce, she's in the public actually, our keynote speaker, Sonia de la Fuente. Sonia is also an attorney at law specializing in sustainable finance. She studied law in Switzerland, thank you very much, in Switzerland, in Germany, and at Columbia University in New York City. She has also worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross. I also briefly introduce the four panelists who will discuss fiduciary duty with us this afternoon. So in the order here, we have first Damian Payatakis, the head of sustainable and impact investing at Barclays Private Bank. And then we have Marcel Meyer, who leads Deloitte Switzerland's Sustainability Services and Investment Management Practice. Marcel is also a member of the Board of Directors of Deloitte Switzerland. Following him is Aaron Bennett, the CIO of the University Pension Plan Ontario, UPP, and he's responsible for UPP's global investment strategy and operations. And last but not least, we have Grégoire Henny, the CIO of the Pension Fund of the State of Geneva, CEPEG, since 2014, and you were previously serving as CIO of the Pension Fund of CERN, also in Geneva. The panelists will have the opportunity to introduce themselves in more details just before the panel discussion begins. Sonia, gentlemen, welcome to this session, and we look forward to hearing you in a few minutes. And now let's go to the agenda. There it is. The event will start with an introductory keynote from Sonia. She will shed light on the concept of fiduciary duty, helping us to understand and interpret it in the context of sustainable finance. Her keynote speech will last for about 15 minutes. And then Damien, Marcel, Aaron, and Grégoire will then share some opening comments with us. Their remarks will be followed by the panel discussion. This part, including opening comments and the panel discussion, will last about 45 minutes. And then in the remaining 15 minutes, you will have the opportunity to ask questions and share comments with us. And we count, of course, on your active participation. Before we begin, we would like to ask you three questions using this Slido app. So you just have to scan the QR code on this slide, and you will see there are three questions. And the first one is, what's the first? And I don't know whether the questions will be shown on the. Here, that's here. So what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of fiduciary duty? So we will see the answers, and the panelists can also see them. So obviously, one of the first words that comes to your mind is responsibility, which is a good thing. Trust also seems to be an important word for you. Integrity, so many, many words, very diverse reaction. But obviously, responsibility is really the main word that comes to your mind. And this is very interesting. Thank you very much for your feedback on that. We will, of course, have the opportunity to discuss this later with a panel. And then second question, and I will ask the second question to appear on the screen. So globally, how much do you think environmental and social considerations are integrated in investment decisions today? So it depends, not really enough, not enough, very much, or somehow. So very few, very much. And not enough and not really enough. Most of your reaction on that. So it's very interesting, and probably we will see later, but the panelists probably share also this view on this very question. And now the third question, please. In your opinion, how important should asset owners, asset managers be held accountable for the negative consequences that investment decisions have as regards the environmental and social considerations? That's a very interesting question. So very interesting. It's rather very important for the audience rather than unimportant or very unimportant. We'll just wait for maybe 10 seconds more, but the trend is very clear for you. This accountability issue is very important. So very, very interesting. Thank you very much for your answers to these questions. And now we arrive to the core of, no, not the core, the introduction of the introductory part of our session, and I will pass the floor to Sonia. Sonia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Antoine. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. And without further ado, let's move to the keynote. So, how to understand or interpret fiduciary duty in the context of sustainable finance? That would be the question that we will explore during the next 15 minutes. And more precisely, can fiduciary duty be compatible with ESG investing? Never, always, to some extent only. That are the questions that we'll try to answer, or at least we will explore. At first glance, a broad overview, you have two positions, completely opposite. I think our audience is rather on the first one, the yes part. Fiduciary duties, according to some people, it's not dismissive, fiduciary duty requires the incorporation of ESG issues. It's an obligation. And on the other side of the spectrum, we will find the opponents which consider that fiduciary duty amounts exclusively to maximization for return for investors. We will see if these two positions have any merit, and we will also, again, explore what there is in the middle between these two extremes positions. Here is a roadmap just for you to have a broad overview of the issues, the topics we will touch upon. So first, to understand where we come from, what is, for lack of a better word, what is the conventional definition of fiduciary duty. Then we will look a bit closer of fiduciary duty in the context of sustainable finance. And finally, we will move to the question, the idea, do we need to redefine fiduciary duty given the social and the current context where we live in? So first of all, what is the conventional definition of fiduciary duty? It's a legal notion which is rooted in common law. If we take an example, because it's not only in financial relationships, it means that a fiduciary, let's say an asset manager, is entrusted with someone else's money, the money of the client. And in this context, you will expect, and actually it's a legal obligation, the fiduciary has the duty to act in the client's best interest. We will look later on what best interest means or can mean. But we have a similar legal notion in civil law. It's not, fiduciary duty exists not only in the US or in the UK. In Swiss law, for instance, we speak about duty of loyalty and diligence. In the EU law, we have the same concept, which is implemented in a series of pieces of legislation. You have here a couple of examples. The exact scope of what is fiduciary duty and its exact content varies across jurisdiction. Still, you will find there is a core principles or values that is common to most, in most jurisdictions. Fiduciary duty entails loyalty, to act honestly and in good faith in the client or the beneficiary's best interest, avoid conflict of interest, and the second part of the notion of fiduciary duty is prudence, the duty of care, the duty of diligence, risk mitigation in a context of financial relationship, and diversification. So the purpose of fiduciary duty is to ensure to achieve the client's or the beneficiary's best interests. Traditionally, or for a long time at least, the idea of best interest has been limited to financial interest. You entrust someone else with your money, you expect that this person will manage your money in your best financial interest. To some extent, that in some views consider that it means maximization of returns. So it's purely, the driving factor here is a financial factor. Now the question is there a broader scope, a broader interpretation of fiduciary duty nowadays? That brings us to the fiduciary duty in the context of sustainable finance. Fiduciary duty has been regarded early on as a potential obstacle to sustainable investments, because we have this traditional idea that to ensure fiduciary duty, you will have to achieve the best financial interest for your client, and at the same time, you have this notion of sustainability. How can you reconcile these two ideas? There have been some international initiatives and studies that have been issued pretty soon to reconcile these two notions. Here are two of probably the most famous, the Freshfields report of 2005 and the UNPRI report. In a nutshell, really, both reports come to the conclusion that fiduciary duty cannot be interpreted as it's not profit maximization. It has a broader scope. And actually, there is room for integration of ESG considerations into investment decisions. The notion of fiduciary duty is part of the EU Climate Action Plan. So when the EU laid out its strategy for climate, it included the idea, the notion of fiduciary duty and the purpose that maybe this notion of fiduciary duty needs to be reframed, or we have to think about it. What does it mean in a context of sustainable finance? So we have seen where we come from. Here is where do we stand now. You have here a probably oversimplified situation, but still. On one side, you have the financial returns. It's arguably outdated interpretation that fiduciary duty amounts to profit maximization. And on the other end, you have impact. Today, we stand pretty much in point 2, where it's a consensus has been raising that fiduciary duty, to comply with fiduciary duty, you have to integrate ESG financial risks, so the physical risks and transition risk into the investment decision. When asset manager, for instance, will have to assess a potential investment, it will have to take into account a series of risks to comply with his fiduciary duty, and among these risks, you will find the ESG financial risk. How climate change, for instance, can impact the value of an investment, or how potential change of regulation can impact, maybe 5 years from now, the value of an investment. That's what we call single materiality or financial materiality. There is also the point 3 that also deals with ESG. It's another example how ESG considerations has been incorporated in sustainable finance, and in the notion of fiduciary duty is the client sustainability preferences. It's in the context of asset management, an asset management contract, or an advisory agreement. Is the duty to inquire about your client's ESG preferences, if any, but you have to ask the question. And then, if the client actually has some ESG preferences, you have to translate it in the investment strategy that you will propose to the client. The client sustainability preferences, it's fully integrated today in EU law through MiFID II. And for instance, in Switzerland, it has been incorporated through self-regulation. And just to go back to point 2 about the ESG financial risk, you have here some examples where this idea, this not idea, but really obligation to incorporate ESG financial risks in you when exercising your fiduciary duty has been also incorporated in a series of pieces of legislation or in self-regulation, speaking about Switzerland, including in the United States through ERISA, for instance. And now we have point 4, that may be a possible avenue or a debated issue, a possible next stage of fiduciary duty, which is double materiality. And it's interesting because we will speak about double materiality in a couple of minutes. Currently, the IEORP 2, which is a directive in the EU which concerns pension funds in the EU, it's under revision, and one of the points, the amendments, is the inclusion of double materiality in this directive. Now, what is double materiality? Largely speaking, double materiality, you will take into account the impact of environmental and social factors on financial performance. And here, I'm sorry, there is a mistake. It's not inside out, but outside in. And the next one is not inside in, but inside out. I'm sorry, I was a bit, a bit tired when I wrote that, I guess. Anyway, so double materiality includes the impact from the outside on your business, but also how your business activities, the business activities of a company, will impact environment and society at large. So the two parts of the impact. The double materiality, it's already implemented in law, at least in the EU, but as well in Switzerland, for instance, through non-financial information disclosure. So as regards accountability, information disclosure, transparency, companies which are subject to these laws, which typically in Switzerland is not all companies, but the companies which are subject to these laws have to inform, to disclose how their business activities impact environment, for instance, or the society at large again. So we see that we are transitioning from, in the corporate world, we are transitioning from fiduciary duty to shareholders, towards shareholder, to a broader notion where fiduciary duty is understood as accountability towards all stakeholders. That's what we call corporate social responsibility. Just a little caveat here. It's this non-financial information disclosure which integrates double materiality. It's a duty to disclose. It's not a duty for the company. It's not an obligation. It doesn't mean that the company will have to stop or refrain from the activities causing negative externalities, but it has to inform the public what negative impact it has. Double materiality in the context of investment decisions, what does it mean? It means that in the process, in the investment process decision, the fiduciary has to take into account the impact or the possible impact of his investment on the environment and society at large. So, in a perfect world, in a win-win situation, it would mean that you will take into considerations ESG factors, but still you will achieve high performance, high financial performance. But it also means that potentially investment with lower financial returns may be preferred over investments with potential higher financial returns. And the question is, are we here in this situation still complying with the fiduciary duty? It's not an uncharted territory because I believe we can draw here a parallel with the exclusion of sin stocks, typically weapons, tobacco, gambling, where some companies, some investment companies, some asset management companies, in their rules, in their guidelines, in their strategy at large, have excluded a series of industries for ethical and reputational considerations, even when these industries, since stock, may have higher returns, because you will receive as an investor, you may receive higher risk premiums, or simply because usually these type of industries have a provide quite stable profits. So why to consider double materiality in the context of sustainable finance, or just in the context of investment decisions? First, maybe because to anticipate regulatory changes, we see that double materiality has been fully integrated with regard to non-financial disclosure obligations. There is already a shift of mindset for social or ethical considerations, similarly as what we see for sin stocks, and also to have a long-term business strategy that of course raises the question of investment time horizons, because typically an asset manager towards a private client, the time horizons can be very different. You can 5 years, 10 years, maybe longer, but it's not that often. Asset owners usually have very longer time horizons. So what are the challenges to implement double materiality in the context of investment decisions? First, the existing legal framework. For instance, asset owners, let's say pension funds, you may have investment guidelines defined in statutory laws, so the framework where you have to operate and decide what sort of strategy you will have for the pension fund. It's something that there is a legal framework, usually typically in Switzerland. The type of investment that a pension fund can make, it's clearly defined in the law. And also, asset owners have a duty of diversification. So it means that probably you may not be able to invest all the funds in companies that are, for lack of a better word, climate friendly. Now, how to address these challenges? The most obvious answer probably will be regulation, policy. If this issue is addressed in the law and it's clarified what fiduciary duty means and how double materiality is integrated and how you have to integrate it when you exercise fiduciary duty, then you have your answer. But it can also be a redefinition of investment strategy, what ex ante, so it implies to reconsider the positioning of a company, what strategy, what does it want to pursue a sustainable strategy? If yes, what kind of sustainable strategy? Typically portfolio decarbonization strategies. Well, you will necessarily integrate double materiality because you will take into account what impact your investment decision may have on climate, or here for decarbonization on climate, but it can also apply to social considerations. And another possible way is to engage with investors. With your clients, if in the context of asset management agreements, to really inquire about ESG preferences. They may be part of educational process toward your clients to really understand how they understand sustainability and what does it mean really. And also engagement towards investees. it may mean that you won't necessarily divest from fossil fuel from companies active on fossil fuel, but you will engage with this company in order to help them transitioning. One of the typical strategy or mean will be steward strategies. So I'm almost finished, really. So one takeaway probably, fiduciary duty is a long-standing legal concept, but it's not a static concept. And now I leave the floor to the experts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for your insightful remarks. And now, indeed, we turn to our four panelists. And first of all, I would like to each of you briefly introduce himself and maybe give some comments on your role. Maybe Damien, would you like to start?
Sure, pleasure. Damien Piatakis. I head up the sustainable and impact investing effort in Barclays within the private bank. So for us, we are dealing with families, family offices, some institutions, helping them to think about both what it is they want to achieve with their wealth and then how to go about structuring and investing it.
Thank you very much. Marcel?
Thanks very much. Warm welcome to everyone. I'm Marcel Meyer. I'm a partner in the Zurich office of Deloitte, responsible for the sustainability services here in Switzerland. I'm an auditor by background and a licensed FINMA auditor for investment firms, so the whole concept of fiduciary duty has already accompanied me for a long time, but now obviously in a different context. And I'm not on the board anymore, so I'm doing actual work again.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcel. Aaron?
Sure. Thanks so much for that. Aaron Bennett, Chief Investment Officer of the University Pension Plan of Ontario. We're the newest defined benefit pension plan in Canada. We are designed for and by the university sector to manage their pensions for both faculty and staff. And as an entity that has only existed now for a little over 2 years, we had the privilege of being able to really step back and think hard about things like beliefs and duty. So really excited to be part of this conversation today, as it was something that we spent a ton of time on ahead of time, and wish that we had had a presentation like Sonia's to summarize many of these things when we did that.
Thank you, Aaron. Grégoire?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Sonia and Antoine, for the kind invitation. Antoine, you said it all. I just want to add that I'm the special advisor of the board of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. The IIGCC is the largest activist group in Europe with 60 trillion in aggregate. So CPG is very active on the ground in Europe as well. And both Antoine and I are sitting on the board of Sustainable Finance Geneva.
That's correct. Thank you very much. So now I have a question for actually all of you, and this is the one. In your opinion, how important should it be for asset owners or asset managers to take into account the environmental and social consequences of their investment decisions, and why? So I don't know who wants to start. Maybe maybe you, as you are.
Yeah.
Right.
So absolutely, I would say. The question really is why. So let's take a step back. I think ultimately, our lives and livelihoods rely on environmental and social systems. And therefore, the investee companies rely on the systems. Therefore, our portfolios do. Therefore, our financial returns do. So what we see is increasingly those systems are under strain. Planetary boundaries that we've heard about, social inequality, unrest, et cetera. Which means that if I am a prudent and self-interested investor, of course, I want to take into account the consequences of the companies that we're investing into, even if the motivation is purely financial.
Okay. Thank you very much. Marcel, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I think on the scale of 1 to 5, I mean, we could, I could just, for the purpose of the discussion, just say 1, so that we have a bit of a spark and talk about it more controversially. But I mean, joking aside, I think from an actual investment perspective, I do think it's somewhere between 4 and 5 as well, just because in particular when you look at long-term investment. I mean, the time horizon is really critical, and I think we're going to get into a bit more detail on that as well. But I think nowadays, you know, the physical, the transition risks, and these kind of concepts, if you don't take that into consideration, you do not have a complete risk-return profile to come to what is a financial which investment is going to perform better financially. So I think from that perspective, clearly, it's a critical element of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Aaron?
I think absolutely, and as Dimitri suggested, I think you have to take a systemic view of this, is that you require these other systems in order for me to do my job, which is to generate positive risk-adjusted returns. But most importantly, my purpose, or the purpose of my fund, is to fund the pensions of our current and our future members. So that's a very long-term time horizon that aligns quite well with a lot of these sustainability issues. And in fact, we've explicitly embedded this in our statement of investment beliefs, that we acknowledge the investments that we make on behalf of our members impact these other systems, and these other systems are important for they're supportive of our ability to generate the returns. I would say one thing about this is that the purpose of your fund is critically important to determining which things on the sustainability or the financial side are most important, and that some level of focus is required. And if you don't focus, it's very easy to get wrapped up into, well, if I can't do all of these things, and if I can't find the perfect investment, then I won't do any investments. Then I'm not doing my job.
Thank you very much. Grégoire?
It is within the DNA of CPEG to incorporate ESG criteria. No investment will be considered without taking into account those criteria and values. It's not about delivering the return objectives within a risk framework, it's how we are delivering it, how we're getting there that matters as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And do you, and a question about single versus double materiality, do you consider that fiduciary duty compliance entails only taking into account financial risks related to environment and social considerations, or does it require to follow the double materiality? That means taking into account not only financial risks, but also impact on investment. Maybe Damien?
Go around. So I think one of the first words, the interpret, is a really critical word here in terms of the concept of fiduciary duty, very clearly broad, and you see that even in the word cloud that got set up for us. And I think that has strengths and weaknesses to it. I think there's a very clear difference between what is permissible and what is possible and what is required. And certainly the view from Freshfields, the 2005, even the 2021 reports, is that there is an expectation, certainly on an ESG criteria or an ESG risk perspective, that should be required to do. We are thinking about how do we invest, what are the risks of the companies from the world onto the portfolio. So that should be fairly clear. I think about the second stage, so the double materiality, when we start talking about the impact that companies have on the world, and therefore what consequences might they have and how they might be priced in. In that case, now we're starting to talk about what was also on there actually, was externalities. So you're starting to see, well, if there's an externality in terms of environmental pollution, be it greenhouse gas emissions or a company that is polluting soil or water, even just air pollution, I think ultimately when those externalities start to be priced in, therefore taking those into account should be something that an investor, a prudent investor, should be doing. So in that sense, you get to a certain stage. I think there is a difference though ultimately when you're talking about trying to generate an outcome. And we sit in a bit of a privileged position because we can face off to our clients. We can have those conversations with them either because we are required to in the European context regulatory-wise, or because we have those ultimately. In those conversations, we can get guidance from clients on what it is, the outcomes they want to generate, not simply on a financial basis, but what matters to them. And therefore, it's a bit more clear for us in terms of taking it to that next stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Who wants to add something? Grégoire maybe, or
Maybe.
Aaron, sorry.
Just briefly on this, I think for us in Canada, double materiality is not conventionally thought of as part of your fiduciary duty, but that does not stop us from saying that if you take a long-term investment view, that these things matter. Whether you can immediately quantify them as financial risks in a way that is expressed in the typical financial metrics is irrelevant. If we feel that over the 20, 30, 40 plus year life of the pension plan that our members will have better outcomes, will have more certainty around funding than they otherwise would by taking these things into account, then that's part of our fiduciary duty. So in some ways it's bringing it back to what's the purpose of the fund and how is this connected to value creation, and it's a bit of that systemic nuance relative to the idiosyncratic elements associated with just the single materiality.
Okay, very interesting. Grégoire, would you like to add something?
Yes, I'd like to highlight a few topics from Sonia's presentation to answer your question. So amongst the risks that needs to be considered by pension funds under the Swiss regulation are the climate risk on investments. And that has two aspects. One is the physical risk, and the other one is the transitional risk. It is very blurry in the Swiss regulation on how we incorporate that. So this is one constraint that we have to deal with. Another thing is that there is absolutely no obligation, as Swiss regulation stands, to incorporate climate impact of our investments. And it is the discretion of pension funds to determine how they're going to solve that issue. So at CPG, we have committed to net zero in 2050. We have developed a climate strategy, which means that we are managing the carbon emissions and the temperature trajectory of our investments. And we are, of course, very much focusing on engagement, because we think after 10 years of engagement, we see last year has been an incredible year for results. So it is about a little bit of all the solutions that were described in Sonia's presentation.
Thank you very much. Marcel, would you like to add something?
Just two thoughts to add. I think and we saw that in Sonia's presentation really well. I think that nowadays people still think, and I think that's the core of the debate, in particular when you look at both sides of the ponds in terms of financial performance and, taking the single materiality concept into consideration. So everything, externalities impacting the financial performance of an investment. I think that by now, if people still question that, then it's just, that's surprising. I mean, we can still talk about, is the investment horizon long enough to really take all that into consideration, but there's no proof that excluding those factors, a sin stock or a fossil fuel company would perform better. That's just volatility in certain prices, etc. But I think for me that should be basically one, and that would already eliminate a big part of the discussion. But I think, as you said, I think the impact, that must be part of a client preference. I think that needs to be established either in the direct discussion or through employee representatives in a pension plan, where that preference can be actually articulated and understood, and if that's agreed, then totally go for double materiality.
And what is done within your organizations to incentivize the integration of environment or social considerations in, for example, the client investment choices for the bank or the investment strategies of the pension funds? I don't know, who wants, Grégoire, maybe you want to start?
Yes, once again, it is within our DNA to tackle and incorporate ESG criteria within our investment strategy. Now, I just want to, so we don't need to be incentivized. Everything, of course, our fiduciary comes first, but then we have to integrate those criteria. I just want to stress that at the end of the day, we have a very complex equation to solve. We have to deliver a return objective within a risk-return framework. Then we have to incorporate values, which means that we are excluding sector sectors and corporates. In addition to that, we have to incorporate ESG factors, and E is obviously the focus at the moment. So we have to manage the carbon emissions, we have to then manage the temperature of our investments, then we have to engage, we have to invest in the energy transitions and so on. So it starts to be a bit complex too. I've seen the words popping up earlier on, and I think there is a huge responsibility on our shoulders. And again, it's not a problem of incentivizing, is how we solve that equation.
I understand. Very interesting. Aaron?
Sure. I think, as with many things in investments, you get what you pay for, not necessarily what you want. So I think what we've focused on, at least initially, is for these issues of large systemic impact on the portfolio, meaning that there's an expectation that the issues that are material for a particular company or a particular industry, those are part of the investment process and those are fully integrated. But for things like climate change and for us, equity, diversity, inclusion, and reconciliation, those are two systemic cross-cutting things that we feel have significant impact or potential significant impact across the portfolio. And so we explicitly develop metrics in individual, divisional, and organizational scorecards, and that's the basis of our performance assessment. So for my investment team, they have specific reductions in terms of carbon footprint is an example of that, and then over time we'll evolve that to make those material. We think those are supportive of one of the other elements that's in all of their scorecards, which is the achievement of risk-adjusted returns over the longer term as well. And then I think it is also maintaining you've got a longer-term horizon, because if you're really taking a 1 or a 2-year horizon on many of these things, both returns and some of these sustainability factors, you're going to get a lot of noise and not a lot of signal.
Okay, very good.
I mean, we don't manage anybody else's money, but what I see with supporting clients on these topics, I mean, it's currently, most of it is either driven by regulation. I mean, we've heard MiFID and Swiss Banking Association's integration of preferences into the client advisory process, or when asset managers would like to comply with things like the net zero asset manager initiatives and things like that, just to establish transparency around their portfolios, which are well performing or bad performing investments under certain ESG considerations. And that I see there's a lot of looking towards regulation. So a lot of companies just want to really make sure that they do it right. And as the regulation is still evolving as well, it's not always simple. And the second thing is really that the actual data and looking for guidance of what is we want to do it well, but how is it being done? Integration of climate risk, is it a climate value at risk, or what are the right metrics and the factors to be considered? I think that's still evolving as well, and these are some of the challenges that we see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Damien?
Not sure I'd add much more. I think, let me bring it to life though, I think for what I see our PMs doing particularly, even in the double materiality sense. So looking at valuing a company, we've now started to incorporate a carbon price into companies even if they've not, with the expectation that this is going to help them to inform what it would be potentially, wherever they are, and do it at different level scenarios, but actually starting to think that through, because the recognition that this is going to help them to assess the company, the risks to it, and the factors that are going to be material, both to the financial returns, but also to our clients who are saying, well, we do want you to be thinking more holistically about what it is that we're trying to achieve. So it's not always necessarily the incentive that does it, but I think the underlying drivers of saying, well, this is a new way of investing that provides us more, still incomplete, but more data and more insight to inform our decisions, but also to invest in line with how our clients are expecting us to do so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very clear. And do you see compliance with your fiduciary duty as an impediment to implement sustainable investment strategies? And if so, could you give us some examples? Maybe.
Well, I'm very optimistic because let me illustrate that. If you can reclassify the different sectors of the economy, you have 4 buckets. The first one is all the sectors that are phasing out. All the sectors like coal mines, I don't think they will survive. And then there are all the sectors in transition, like the fossil fuel sector. And then you have the pure green, the all green, like solar, wind. And then you have the fourth, what I call the fourth industrial revolution, is the green technology. And if out of the 4, only 2 will survive in the long run. So this shows you where the economy is going or where the economy has to go. And I think that will create amazing opportunities from an investment point of view. And I'm referring to impact investments. I think you can deliver a win-win-win-win situation whereby you can deliver a decent return for beneficiaries. You can fund the development of scalable impact solutions. You can also provide solutions for consumers and households. And then you can also help governments to deliver their net zero commitments. So I see a lot of opportunities in this environment. Of course, we'll see a lot of disruptions, but I'll see also a lot of opportunities.
Okay, very good. Yes, Damien?
It was something Aaron said, it prompted a thought. So I don't see it as a constraint, but again, I'm a bit privileged in that we are facing off to clients in terms of what they want and being able to construct and have those dialogues and discussions. A little bit of what you said, I'll take more the full quote. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you can get what you need. In the unlikely economist of Mick Jagger, in that sense, and bringing it to what we're talking about here, it's the idea that, and a little bit to your point as well, Gregoire, that we tend to look at this as a unitary piece. Let us only look at the sustainable outcomes that an investment is going to be making. But clients have both complex views, but also complex needs. They still need to generate financial returns, most do. Some may not, but most do, to retire, to send kids to school, to buy a house. And therefore, sometimes those sustainability strategies or the expectations that they have may not be possible to deliver to them because of what we have today or the data or the product availability. So I think that it's not a constraint per se, but I think the reality of where we are sometimes makes it something that you have to work through with a client. And again, we can face off. I was talking to a family who was very, very keen on both gender equity and also youth engagement as one of the things that really mattered to them. Trying to construct a well-balanced portfolio that was going to hit a time horizon of their investment needs over multiple generations with that as a singular focus is impossible, right? You're not going to be able to do that on a financial basis, even if potentially, and there's limits what you could invest into as well. So bringing it to life, the conversation is, let us think about where and how you can do that, not whether or not you should or shouldn't, or how we might invest on your behalf on that basis. So, again,
okay.
Maybe no Rolling Stones fans in the audience there.
Yes, Marcel or Aaron?
One aspect to consider on this one is as well, I guess, is who are your clients and where are they based? Because I think that's in particular the last few months it's become quite a minefield, in particular with some clients sitting a bit more south from where you are. And in particular, asset managers producing strategies and structuring products, that fiduciary duty is very much on the very left side of that scale that we've seen, and cater for multiple different clients, globally. I think it's definitely something for global asset managers that is a big challenge currently.
Aaron?
I would say that it's not really an impediment. Fiduciary duty is what drives us to do this. I think However, there is, as some have said, there's an interpretation around what's possible and what's available out there in the market. There is also the view that says, well, wouldn't it just be easier if you just excluded all the bad things from the portfolio? And I think Damien illustrated it's very easy to get to a portfolios that's just cash at the end if you truly eliminate all of the companies that are producing some sort of trade-offs that someone would object to. And I think that's an important point to make, is there's no perfect solutions, there are optimized trade-offs. And that's really what we try and focus on. And we try and focus on a couple things. When it comes to divestments or exclusions, which are a big topic, I think, for a lot of pensions, that's a tool that we will use, but we don't use for ethical or values-based reasons. We exclude things like tobacco and weapons and Russian investments because we think they're bad long-term investments. If there's any other reason to exclude them, then we have to be explicitly directed by our clients to do so. But we will exclude them if we feel like they're poor long-term investments, and we can't engage with them in such a way that we can be reasonably assured that they will transition to being good long-term investments.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Now I have a question for Marcel. At Deloitte, are you noticing an evolution on how clients are considering their fiduciary duties towards their own clients? And would you say that investment decisions are moving away from pure financial decisions, or performance, only?
Yeah, I think definitely what we're seeing is that these non-financial or these risks and opportunities that stem from physical and transition risks are being taken into consideration way more than previously. I think that's a great development, because that's at least gets us a bit more towards the middle of the whole equation. But I think I haven't. In the big sphere of the clients, I think not many actually really go to the far right in terms of really looking at it holistically, from the double materiality perspective, etc. But there's definitely a number of financial institutions that really try to differentiate through making that an explicit part of their offerings and trying to serve that clientele who actually is interested to make those investments.
Mm-hmm. And are there some of your clients that would like to be to go further, but they really see a fiduciary duty as an obstacle, or is it no issue really for your clients?
No, they don't see fiduciary duty as an obstacle, but they explicitly made the point that for their clients, their definition of fiduciary duty is to include the impacts, and that's a key element of those sorts of mandates and client relationships. So there is definitely that, and I think that's that there are banks and the investment advisors that have created quite a profile with that, and definitely see a lot of success in the market. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I have a question for our Canadian panelist. So is portfolio decarbonization seen as a breach or a potential breach of fiduciary duty under Canadian law? And more generally, are there specific laws or regulations which address the relationship between fiduciary duty and sustainable investing in Canada?
So to your first question, decarbonization is very much not thought of as a breach, and I think widely accepted, particularly among the larger pensions that can invest in the internal expertise to really think about what that looks like in a multi-asset portfolio and have control over their investments or significant influence with their external managers. So it's very common amongst the larger ones, and certainly increasingly so the medium-sized ones, such as ourselves. The smaller ones, much less common. because they do not have the internal expertise, they don't have the control or the influence, and very often they're very much beholden to what the market will provide them with, and so they take a very, very narrow interpretation, although that is changing. You see a lot of talk about decarbonization. The commitments amongst the large ones and down to the mid-size, you see pretty good commitments in terms of net zero commitments with milestones and clear plans and things of that nature, including ourselves. We made a net zero commitment very early on, net zero in 2040, and a focus on real world emissions as opposed to just the emissions within your portfolio, because it's relatively easy to decarbonize a portfolio. It's hard to decarbonize an economy, particularly one such as Canada, which is resource-based. In Canada, in terms of the regulatory environment, it's been interesting. Our regulators on both the pension and the security side have been very, very supportive around disclosure. Particularly around climate and increasingly around equity, diversity, inclusion, and reconciliation, and very quick to adopt ISSB standards as well as things like the TCFD. So that's been excellent. I think what they haven't been doing, which I think is the right way to do this, is they have not been interfering in the investment process, because I think that's not a particularly effective way, because I think these are complex matters. I don't think there is a single solution, and I think it's really important that you have a variety of these things. And then the final piece, which has actually come up through industry, but also with the support of the federal government and our Sustainable Finance Action Committee, which is a committee stood up by our current administration with active participation from my boss, our CEO, as well as a number of our trustees. They've been really key in establishing that connection between industry and the government around what the expectations are, and they've developed a transition taxonomy, which is looking to be adopted across the industry. And I think that's not a regulation per se, but I think a really effective way to drive something that's critically important for the Canadian economy as well as the global one, and that's climate transition.
Thank you very much. And I have a last question before we move to questions from the audience. Just one last question from my side, and it's a question that particularly interests me as a lawyer. Do you feel that explicitly integrating environment and social considerations in the law or in self-regulation will help implementing sustainable strategies? I don't know, maybe Damien?
I think it will be useful. I think the ultimate goal is clarity, right? Whether or not you do that through a formal framework, through legislation or regulation, or whether or not you do that through consensus, I think the clarity is the important thing so that the expectations are being met. And that's really interesting because back to the original point of fiduciary duty not being static. Even to the extent that the returns part, I think this is the funny thing that people forget. So financial economists by training originally, when I started into this space, I started looking, it was very interesting because we think about risk-adjusted returns as the maximizing risk-adjusted returns is the primary goal. When did we start thinking about that? It was only 1952 that Markowitz publishes portfolio selection as a paper to actually start to say, at a risk-adjusted return basis is what we should be looking at. You go further to almost to the left of your arrow, and you start thinking about, well, what about maximizing returns on an absolute basis before a risk-adjusted basis? Mathematicians started working on that, then getting to Markowitz's work. And that actually opens up our views around what fiduciary duty would be in terms of financial returns as well. And that for me is very interesting in terms of thinking about, well, that opens up, asset liability matching in terms of investor horizon. It changes expectations around diversification as well. So for me, it's as much the social practice and the more people in the wider community that understands what those expectations are. If regulation can help to keep confidence or clarify, then that's excellent. But I'm not sure in the same way that the involving in the investment process is going to benefit the overall aims in terms of what's going on.
Okay, thank you very much. Grégoire?
Well, the clear answer is yes. I think it would really help to clarify the regulation for institutional investors It will also help to encourage collective action. And one of the outcomes of COP26 was to encourage collective action. But that is, in my opinion, not sufficient. We need to work on a unity of context, exactly what has been done by the European Union. And by that, I mean a total alignment of policymakers, laws, regulations, and so on. Last year was an amazing year in terms of ESG net inflows in Europe. 90% of the net inflows went to Europe because of that unity of context. And I think we need to replicate that in Switzerland. And then we also need to work on the framework. We need to have standards, quality data. We need to have a clarity on taxonomy and so on. All these things matters, not just regulation.
Marcel?
I think, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of regulating every single detail, but I think the principles, I think, are quite important. And I think the second point you've mentioned, Damien, I think the level set of the expectations and create a little bit of a level playing field, just what should be there and what's expected. And I think, I mean, one example that just, I think is really critical in this, and it's through SBA and the MiFID II, is the actual, specifically ask your client about your ESG preferences. And I think just making that mandatory makes a big difference, because we've seen in some instances where a bank was very clearly saying, our clients are not interested in, sustainable investments, and we've scratched our heads. It's like, really not? And after long investigations, they realized that the relationship managers actually deliberately, do not talk about sustainable investments because they feel uncomfortable. They don't know the products yet. They don't know how to explain it. So they actively suppressed talking to their clients about that. Once they changed that, they got some experts in the room and helped them. I mean, the inflows were just like up through the roof, and everybody was like, oh, wow. And the reason for that was because now you need to ask for those preferences.
These are typical examples of good regulation, where you open the discussion, you promote discussion, and I think that's...
Set certain minimum requirements, not regulate all the details, but make that certain minimum requirements sticking, and that unlocks some of the collective action as well.
Aaron, do you want to add something?
I think you absolutely need to have some legal element that clarifies it's okay and it's necessary to have this conversation. I think you need to be very careful about what's in that conversation, or what the outcomes of that conversation are, or how that is implemented, because I think there's a variety of different ways, and you get a lot more variables in that, and so you've got to be careful. But I agree 100% in terms of having this as a default option for DC plans. I think that's an interesting one I've seen. I think making it part of the intake questionnaire, making it part of your stakeholder engagement. It's something that we've done and we've found incredibly powerful, but it's not easy to do either. And I think we have to acknowledge that these are not easy conversations, but I think they're necessary conversations. And if you get past this initial hump of whether or not this is aligned with your fiduciary duty, there's a lot of value and benefit to having those conversations.
The easiest way to figure out what's in the best interest of a client is ask. Basically, that's what it comes down to. It takes away the assumption part of it. So the more that we can get that insight and input into that process, the easier it will be to fulfill their expectations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now we have exactly 15 minutes for questions in the audience. I see there are already a few questions. So maybe I will start with you, Madame, here.
Thank you. My name is Johanna Zuleta, and I am a connector of interdisciplinary collaborations. I will take advantage of this experts panel to try to understand something perhaps naively, but I wonder, for example, in social impact, we have the common goods that we're losing, like the libraries. How do you invest in that? Because it's kind of like in a nowhere land. Just help me understand them. I know it's a different question, but do you also invest in the common goods, or is that only a public sector approach and they're not investing anymore? So I just wonder if in these impact investment, how is that social roots incorporated? Thank you.
I mean, if we're talking about, so impact investment probably falls more to me. I think that so it depends on if there is a commercial model behind it, right? If there is no commercial model behind it, what you're doing is philanthropic by nature. And again, there are different ways of how you can structure finance, blend it, et cetera, to achieve some of those aims. Your question, though, I think speaks to what would be called, in some instances, ultimate goals for investing for a sustainable impact. And that does exist. The question ultimately is twofold. One is it something that a traditional portfolio manager would be interested in investing in because it makes sense on a returns basis and it just hasn't been realized yet? Or is it something that an investor would be looking at because it speaks to them as an individual or the family or the foundations, right? So if you've got an education charity, the idea of investing into a library would probably make sense just by the nature of what it is they're trying to seek to do. So does it happen? Yes, but I think it ultimately comes back to the underlying business model, commercialization, et cetera, whether or not that happens or doesn't. Not sure if you answered.
Thank you very much. There is a question here. Sir.
Yeah, Paul McIntosh, Asia Asset Management. Speaking to the legal issue and also to some extent to Sonia's points, do the panel feel that they are constrained by an insufficiently developed definition of fiduciary duty? Because if we're just talking about profit maximization, where does that leave if that's just a two-word definition, where does that leave risk-adjusted returns, which are obviously absolutely basic to any practice of responsible fiduciary-driven investing? And it seems that if the risk adjustment side is fully understood in its broadest context, a lot of the principal issues, as opposed to the practical issues, take care of themselves. If there are clearly understood environmental long-term risks to an investment, that immediately changes its profile in terms of, is this something you want to invest in for profit maximization?
I'd say yes, I agree with you 100%. The risk component is incredibly important. I think an additional element is also considering your investment horizon, because maximizing short-term returns can generate one outcome because you're not concerned about some of these slower burning externalities that don't matter until they suddenly become internalized very quickly. So I think for us, that's something that we thought a lot about in terms of lining up. Our actuaries spend all this time forecasting out our liabilities 20, 30, 40 years and making assumptions around that, and that made us comfortable around doing the same kind of thing around our assets and our risk profile. So I think that both the risk as well as the investment horizon are critical elements of that fiduciary duty, and thinking about things like generational equity along the pension continuum as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. with the blue suit.
Hello, I'm Philip, and I'm a physicist looking for a job, but I'm kind of very interested in the discussion about physical limits. And my question is, because we need to rethink this fiduciary duty for sustainability, if you had a magic wand, how would you design a fiduciary duty that can reconcile, that is reconciliated with physical limits? And what would it take to implement them from all stakeholders?
Well, I think I can take it from a theoretical point. I mean, you guys are the practitioners, but I think the perfect situation would be if you could have an absolute true expectation of each and every individual client, and you could perfectly measure the risk adjustments and all these different factors, that you have full transparency of what is the right investment for you. At least from a theoretical perspective, that would be perfect. But I think there are so many constraints practically that I doubt we'll ever get there.
It's an incredibly hard question to answer. It's a great one. I think two things that I'd probably think about are one, the data issue is having more data about the physical environment and how investments interact with that would be very important. But the second point, and this is maybe more to your question around what would I change about the definition of fiduciary duty, is I'd inject an element of resilience. Because the future is incredibly hard to predict in investments and in physics in terms of what it'll look like in the future, what technology will look like in the future. And so I think injecting an obligation to produce some level of resilience, which is a risk-related term, but I think an important nuance in terms of the different language, resilience would be helpful in that regard.
Madam?
As I understand, I love mine of the One Goal Initiative for Governance. As I understand, the definition evolves with the zeitgeist. And in such a case, how can that have legal significance? It's a norm rather than law. So how does that work? It's kind of a weird chimera.
That's probably to the lawyers. The common versus civil law.
To press in the middle.
Okay. Well, it's a norm. Yes or no. In Switzerland, typically, it's a law. There is an article which defines what is fiduciary duty. But even if it's incorporated, it's a legal norm. There is room for interpretation, and it will be interpreted based according to the zeitgeist, according to what is happening in society. So the issue is it a norm? Is it rooted in case law? Is it a standard? It's not really relevant. The point is there is room for interpretation, even if because of course it will depend how narrowly it is defined in the law. In Switzerland, you have this very broad idea. It's a duty of diligence and loyalty. What does it mean? Again, you will have to look what's happening in the world, so to decide what is the duty of diligence toward a client if you don't inform the client about the possible negative impact of his investment if it invests in companies active in the sector of fossil fuels. I don't know if I answered your question. No, not really. No, okay.
And let's assume that fiduciary duty, as interpreted today, is an impediment to the evolution of sustainable finance, it can be changed, and that is what happened in some countries, including in the U.S., where they decided that some clarity was needed to say that pension funds, for example, were allowed to take into account these factors in the management of their assets. So parliaments in the US, in England, and even in Switzerland could decide to change the law and to change the rules and to make things clearer. And very recently, because we are here in Switzerland, the Federal Council decided that rules applicable to the management of assets of pension funds did not need to be changed because it was it left room enough to make that kind of investments possible. Sorry, yes.
I'm wondering how the panel feels about the linkage between fiduciary duty and tax evasion and tax optimization. For example, as you know, a lot of US multinationals are based in Ireland, which used to have the lowest corporate tax rate in Europe. But there was a loophole that enabled them not to pay any tax at all. So Apple Computer makes everything in China, ships it to Ireland, puts the last screw in the block, and then all of a sudden it's an Irish product. And the tax loophole means they didn't have to pay tax. And the European Court of Justice ruled that the Apple owed the Irish taxpayers $13 billion. And the Irish government said, no thanks, we don't want to take that money from you. So how does fiduciary duty and sort of ethical investment criteria measure those kinds of things, where a company can be very good in terms of low energy or increased energy efficiency, but on the other hand, completely avoid paying tax? What do you think about these things? And is it considered, is tax optimization something that fiduciary duty people think about?
Yes, absolutely. I think and maybe this speaks to the question around common good as well, because ultimately, although you can argue whether governments are actually deploying some of this tax revenue into the common good or not, but it is a key area that we'll look into, both from an external manager perspective, but an individual corporate entity, to understand a couple of things. One, what's the level of tax you're paying in the areas that you're taking revenue from, and two, to the extent you have some tax optimization, we avoid tax evasion as much as we can, and that's something that we're doing. But to the extent you have tax optimization, we want to understand what is underpinning that, how is it related to your revenue streams, and how sustainable that is. And to be frank, more often than not, I've seen most tax optimization strategies are not particularly sustainable, and at some point they break down, and someone has a judgment against you for $13 billion, or you have to restructure everything anyway. So I think it is one of these things that it gets back to, in the short term, some types of tax optimization may be positive and have a positive impact on your investment returns, but in the long term, it may introduce volatility and risk. And that's something that we certainly want to be aware of, and we want to factor into how we're pricing the investment. And when we can't price that risk, we would prefer to avoid it.
We just have time to two last questions. There was a lady here.
In the event that I'm invested in a pension and we find ourselves, the pension fund has underlying stranded assets, or what kind of sort of steering can be moved out of the stranded assets? And my second question is, I'm just watching this space very closely. CA100 now, I think it's the Nature, and A100, IGCC. Are there any kind of real, there's data's harmonizing, standardizing, and we're converging. So data sets will obviously get better and better. What kind of spaces should we be watching to see real, pension funds are obviously very regional, global, but what kind of real signals should we be watching to see if any bold statements are being made? Because we have these urgencies, running out of time. We hear a lot about climate, and obviously social dimensions are coming more to the fore. Just from a kind of technical question, what kind of spaces should I be watching? the GFANZ umbrella, NZAO, and so on. Getting data for me to be watching pension fund space, where should I be looking?
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear, because there was some noise, the background noise. I didn't hear the first question. I heard the time horizon of 3 years.
Let's just say, I'm now going to my retirement years. I obviously have to, longevity, we have to live. What if I find that my pension fund actually has been investing in stranded, or what kind of mitigation would play into that? Okay. Just it's coming from a hopefully far out from retirement, but something just to consider. And secondly, a lot of noise, a lot of convergence, but what kind of platforms should I be looking at to see real bold signals in the pension fund space?
So I have 1 minute to answer two tough questions. So the first one is, I think it's a very complex issue, because we're engaging with the fossil fuel sector, and they're getting rid of their most carbon-emitting activities. But other sectors are buying back those activities, like the utility sector, and that's a big problem. So we might be safe on the fossil fuel sector, but if you dig deeper into the utilities, for example, you'll find out that there might be stranded assets. So that's the reason why activists have to embrace a broader process in order to engage with all the different sectors. So it's a tough question. I don't have the answer, but I'm just sharing with you a concrete example why it's so tough. because other sectors, once again, are buying those very profitable activities and sold at a very cheap price. The second question is, that's a big issue that we're seeing is a pop-up of all those initiatives. And as a pension fund, we have to focus only on a few. There's nature action, water action, climate action, and it's so hard to be, to engage with all these initiatives. I'm convinced we need to have standards, and also we're seeing some sort of collaboration between those, and I'm very pleased to see that the IGCC has started to collaborate with the GFANs, started to embrace, and broaden the focus, so it's not just climate, it's and the environment as well, which includes biodiversity, water, and so on. So I think going forward, my hope is to see a simplification of all those initiatives. And also, I hope we'll make it more, we need to add more activists. We may need to add more people to engage, because that's a very important part of the activity. But I agree with you, these are very big concerns. I hope I answered your questions.
Thank you very much. Time is over. It's already 5. You will have the opportunity to ask questions maybe later. Thank you very much to all of you, to Sonia, to Damien, Marcel, Aaron, and Grégoire, and to all of you also for your questions and comments. I just have one information to give you. There will be in the next room the closing remarks, the closing event of Building Bridge 2023 in 15 minutes. So if you want to, you just have to change the room, and you will take part in the last event of this Building Bridge event. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.